I'm Erica, and I'll be your moderator for today. So as Yoke said, she is providing technical support. And we also have Felicia, who said she'd monitor the chat and the Q&A, but we're not going to use the chat. But we are your co-organizers of this session, so we're very delighted to have you here. We're still waiting for a couple more people. And then we'll get into what we hope will be a dynamic and interesting conversation. And we really encourage you to participate, join in, have a chat. This is all about being informal and really talking through this very important subject.
Hi, this is Carla Fossand, joining from USAID. Excited to be here today.
Hi, Carla. Nice to have you here. I think we just have one more person joining us. It feels almost like a flight, you know? Let's just wait till the last passenger boards. We are just waiting for the organizers to give us the signal that our session is closed. I see that everyone who's put their name down for the session is included, but let's just wait until they give us the clear.
We should have gotten the song. It was the same thing last time. We should have gotten the song.
Or perhaps we start with the first slides anyway, Erica, and then
get started.
The last one.
Sounds good. Well, welcome everyone. Lovely to have you here. Again, I'm Erica. I'm your moderator today. I'm the executive director at Safe Hands. And we have the co-organizers of this session, Yoke, who will be helping us on the technical support, and Felicia, who will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So our session today, a bold new agenda using a comprehensive SRHR definition to accelerate family planning advocacy. So our focus for our session today is really focusing in on that Guttmacher-Lancet Commission on SRHR, bold new definition. And we will be discussing today the evidence that's included in the definition and examining the policy and practice implications in adopting the definition at the global, regional, and national levels. So we'll be structuring our discussion today by starting with a few introductions and some warm-ups to get us in the right mood to discuss. And then we will have a presentation from Anna from the Guttmacher Institute on the definition. And then we will plunge right into what we hope will be a dynamic and engaging discussion about how we really use this framework to accelerate our advocacy. So next slide, please. So just a few expectations from our session today. Use the hand raise function when you'd like to contribute. Feel free to use the chat function to agree or build upon a statement. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking to reduce any background noise. Be wonderful to see all of your faces. So if you can, please turn on your camera. And we'd really like if you could limit individual comments to 1 to 2 minutes, just so that we can have the best discussion. And let's stay on topic so we can have lots of time to discuss. Next slide, please. So while we can't be together in person, we'd love to see where you're all tuning in from today. We'd love if you could stamp your location on this map. Now here's a new function in Zoom that we recently learned at the very top of your screen. If you click on View Options, you can then select Annotate, and then click on a stamp, and then you can stamp your location. So I have stamped my location. So again, under the View Options, select Annotate, and then pick a stamp. Okay, so somebody is asking, I can see view options. So yes, click on view option on the little arrow pointing down, and then you can click on annotate. Once you click on annotate, you can select a stamp, or you could select an arrow, and then click on your location. Did that work for everyone? You can see most of us based. No, that didn't work. Would you like to just write in the chat where you are today? Yemen, fabulous. And anyone else who wasn't able to annotate, you just type it into the chat. And the US. So we've got a lot of people joining us from the US, 2 of us in the UK, 1 in Europe, and 1 in Yemen. Wonderful, so great to see that. So let's get started on our discussion, and I'm really happy that we are joined today by Anna Poppenschok, who is a senior research associate at the Guttmacher Institute. And Anna is part of the Guttmacher Lancet Commission team and is also one of the authors of the Worldwide Abortion Estimates. So I'm going to hand over to Anna to talk us through a broad introduction to the Guttmacher Lancet Commission on SRHR.
Thank you so much, Erica, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And like Erica said, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Guttmacher Lancet Commission this morning. So next slide, please. Before we dive into our commission, I want to first briefly explain what a Lancet Commission is. Lancet Commissions are an opportunity for experts to convene and delve into a health predicament that has been neglected or understudied. This collaboration is science-led and multidisciplinary with the aim of producing a report that will promote transformational change focused on policy and political action. So in 2016, the Guttmacher Institute partnered with the Lancet and the African Population and Health Research Center to create a commission on sexual and reproductive health and rights, reflecting a joint vision of a world in which all people are able to exercise their rights and responsibilities regarding sexual behavior and reproduction freely and with dignity. The commission consisted of 16 experts from Africa, Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North and South America, with multidisciplinary experience in a broad range of issues related to sexual and reproductive health and rights. The commission also benefited from an advisory group that was made up of 23 representatives from sexual and reproductive health and rights, global health, and funding organizations who also provided feedback on the report and its recommendations. Next slide, please. So after about 2 years of work, the final product of this commission was a report which was published in the Lancet in early May of 2018. And the report highlighted the enormous gaps in sexual and reproductive health and rights that exist around the world and presented the most recent evidence to quantify the toll those gaps take on individuals, communities, and economies. This commission also challenged the limited view of sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights put forward by the Sustainable Development Goals, and proposed a bold and comprehensive vision that aims to address the sexual and reproductive health and rights needs of all people across their life course. The commission also presented arguments to justify investment in sexual and reproductive health and rights, including the costs of providing relevant health information and services, and the benefits from doing so, before concluding with 8 key recommendations. So since we don't have a lot of time together today, I'm going to focus mostly on the definition and the essential services put forward by the commission report, and then finally close out with a brief overview of the recommendations. Next slide, please. One of the key contributions of this report, which Erica mentioned, is the view that sexual health, sexual rights, reproductive health, and reproductive rights are distinct but interlinked components, and that SRHR must be addressed as an integrated whole. The first global agreement that created common language around these issues was the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development, held in Cairo in 1994. It defined sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, but it did not use the term sexual rights. And since then, over the past 25 years, language around sexual and reproductive health and rights has evolved considerably, but none of the ensuing United Nations agreements have gone far enough, and none have used the full term SRHR. Next slide, please. So to address this, the Commission presents a comprehensive, integrated definition of sexual and reproductive health and rights. The report clearly defines all four components: sexual health, sexual rights, reproductive health, and reproductive rights, but then also creates one definition that recognizes that improving health depends on advancing rights. So as you can see, the colors used in this graphic are meant to illustrate the fact that there's an interwoven and overlapping relationship between these four areas. The definition also reflects an emerging consensus on the services and interventions needed to address the sexual and reproductive health needs of all individuals. The Commission's report is based on evidence, but grounded in human rights principles. The comprehensive definition lays out the rights of all individuals to have their bodily integrity, privacy, and personal autonomy respected, to freely define their own sexuality, including sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, to decide whether and when to be sexually active, choose their sexual partners, and have safe and pleasurable sexual experiences, to decide whether, when, and whom to marry, to decide whether, when, and by what means to have children and how many children to have, and finally, to have access over their lifetime to the information, resources, services, and support necessary to achieve all of the above, free from discrimination, coercion, exploitation, and violence. Next slide, please. Related to and part of the definition, the report also proposes an integrated package of essential sexual and reproductive health interventions. This proposed package mirrors the components of the comprehensive definition and includes interventions related to the 7 key areas of sexual and reproductive health that are discussed in the report and shown in this graphic. These include the prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS and sexually transmitted infections, infertility, and reproductive cancers, counseling and services for a range of modern contraceptive methods, care during pregnancy and childbirth, including postnatal and newborn care, safe abortion services and treatment of complications from unsafe abortion, and prevention, detection, and counseling for gender-based violence. Next slide, please. The Commission also shines a light on the need for additional support for groups that are often marginalized, disadvantaged, or subject to discrimination, and who have distinct SRHR needs. These populations vary from one country to another and include those who are often hardest to reach. And while this graphic is by no means an exhaustive list, in particular, the Commission's report highlights the importance of protecting the sexual and reproductive health and rights of displaced and refugee populations and strengthening services in humanitarian crisis settings, as well as acknowledging and addressing the needs of people of diverse sexual orientations, gender identities, and expression and sex characteristics. Next slide, please. So finally, like I mentioned, the report concludes with 8 recommendations for national, regional, and global policymakers, health practitioners, educators, and health and rights advocates. 3 of the recommendations supported actions on the items I just discussed. So 1, adopting and applying the new comprehensive definition of sexual and reproductive health and rights, progressively expanding access to an essential package of sexual and reproductive health interventions, as well as providing additional support to groups that are often marginalized, disadvantaged, and subject to discrimination. Additional recommendations address gaps in health services and the need to take action on components of sexual and reproductive health and rights often neglected in program implementation, including safe abortion care, adolescence, and sexual and gender-based violence. The report also recommended identifying and exploring research gaps on issues and populations with no or insufficient data, as well as addressing social and cultural and economic barriers by supporting changes in laws, policies, and social norms and structures. Finally, the Commission called for sustainable financing and support of sexual and reproductive health and rights, and for ongoing accountability to ensure the global community and national governments meet their financial and health services goals. Next slide, please. So in closing, I just want to briefly talk about the reception and impact of the report. Since we launched it in May of 2018, we have been thrilled by the robust response to it. By the end of 2019, we had hosted 45 unique engagement activities with country-level, regional, and global stakeholders across the world, and also supported country-level dissemination activities in Mexico, Zambia, and Lebanon. But beyond events, we have been more thrilled to see that there has been a real dynamic use of the report's findings and recommendations, and have seen really promising signs of uptake from civil society, multilateral organizations, the donor community, and more. Obviously, I don't have time to go into everything today, but two recent examples of the use of the Commission include the Commission being featured in the Universal Health Coverage Statement signed by over 50 countries at the 2019 United Nations General Assembly, as well as being part of the Nairobi Summit, which featured the Commission's essential interventions as part of the foundational commitments for the summit attendees. Now, we all know the world has changed dramatically in the last year, and while we are no longer able to be meeting in person to discuss how to implement the report and its recommendations, we fundamentally believe that the Commission is even more relevant in light of COVID-19. The recommendations from the Guttmacher-Lancet Commission remind us that sexual and reproductive health and rights are essential, even in times of crisis, and the Commission's agenda will continue to be an important resource for the field as we navigate this reality. So we're very grateful to be part of this roundtable discussion today to continue these important conversations about how the Commission's definition and recommendations can be relevant to your work in accelerating family planning advocacy. Family planning is such a key component of sexual and reproductive health care as reflected in the Commission's essential services, but as this report has shown, it is also only one part of a broader approach that we need to fully realize sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. Next slide, please. So just in closing, I just wanted to underscore that all of the Commission's resources are freely available online, and we encourage you to download them and share them widely. The full report is only available on the Lancet's website, but we have an executive summary available in 8 different languages on the Guttmacher Institute's website. So thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to the discussion that will follow.
Thank you, Anna. And it's so compelling to see rights at the very center of this bold new agenda. So I'd like to start the discussion with all of you. Please do participate. Feel free to put your hand up or put your thoughts in the chat. But I'd like to start the discussion by thinking about the definition itself. So the definition is certainly bold and controversial in how it names the neglected areas of SRHR. We'd like to know how widely, as the family planning community, do you think that this has been adopted? Have you seen this being adopted in your work? Has this been a framework that has been useful? Has it not been widely adopted? Has it not been useful? Just like to get a little bit of a read of the room on whether or not this has been a tool that you've been actively using.
Erica, I can say something.
Please go ahead.
This is Rabab Pettit. I work at USAID in the Office of Population and Reproductive Health, and I'm the communications and outreach lead for the office. I actually wanted to answer your question with maybe another question and an observation. I think in terms of not just understanding what the expanded or the definition of true SRHR is, it's not just that, but also I think from our end, it depends on how this definition is understood politically and what it means and how this terminology is used in communications that come out from the USG. So based on what the political posture is in the United States, that's pretty much what we follow. And I'm curious to know if, I know that Europe has taken a different approach, but if others have seen, depending on the country context, what is the comfort level in truly not just understanding, but really internalizing and socializing these definitions, and then making sure that those that need to be served under this expanded definition are actually being served and their concerns are being addressed. I love the slide, Anna, that you had with the communities or the parts of our population that are underrepresented when you talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I think that cultural, religious, social norms pretty much, and sometimes political beliefs affect how that plays out in real life. So would be curious to hear what experiences others have had in terms of working with countries. I'll stop there.
I believe Bushra has his or her hand up. Please go ahead.
Oh, it is her.
Her, please go ahead.
Yes. I'm Bushra Makarah. I'm from Yemen. I work for Save the Children Yemen as the Family Planning USAID project director. I want to share my thought for the comprehensive from fragile and humanitarian setting perspective, because unfortunately, I don't know, even before the war in Yemen, because we lived all levels in reproductive health for us is maternal newborn. Other than that is luxury. So anyone else talking about post-abortion care, abortion is an issue in Yemen, but let's talk about post-abortion care and fertility. All the other components you have been describing is something we cannot even talk about. Even when we applying for a project or in Yemen itself for the government, it's something more than we can do. So maternal newborn, we stuck with MISP. When MISP started, we stuck with the kids, we stuck with the activities there, and not even all the objective of MISP. Only the maternal newborn part, and everything else is not there. So when we are 6 years after war in Yemen, we haven't moved of MISP yet. Family planning in Yemen, or let's say that we started to care about family planning in Yemen when MISP started to change the objective and added family planning there. So other than that, unfortunately, we're still behind. A definition of comprehensive reproductive health, I think it should be defined even for donors, for other places, not even for government in all the countries. I don't think that they will say no for the package, because especially in fragile and humanitarian setting, we accept what we can get. But this is for humanitarian and fragile places. So thank you. I don't want to take a lot of time from others, but I can come up with other comments when people just share their thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. And the last two comments are very, very similar in how that definition is really understood politically. Does anyone want to mention about how the definition has been received politically in their country or in the context that they're working in? And just while I have you, there's also a question in the chat. Anna, can you speak to the decision to leave menstrual management and related disorders as a key health area out of the definition?
Yeah, thank you, Vera, for that question. And it's something that we've been asked previously as well. We had this comment, a very useful comment in the Lancet in response to the commission asking a very similar question. And, you know, I think what it came down to was for the commission, we were stuck with a very limited word count, and we were, you know, confined with the spaces that we had. And so the definition itself wasn't seen as encompassing everything that it could, because there was just no way that we could fit everything into that word limit and into that, panel box in the Lancet report. But that we hoped that it would encourage discussions like this to say, well, why isn't menstrual management and related disorders included there? We need to get that on the agenda as well, and to really continue to inspire us to be thinking as aspirationally as possible about what is the full spectrum of sexual and reproductive health and rights that we can really achieve. And so we really welcome comments like these so that we can continue to push the definition to the largest possible reach that it can be. And I'm happy I can send you the link to this response to the comment that we had from the Lancet, so you can also see how we wrote about it.
That's helpful. Thank you, Anna. Did anyone want to pick up on the comment about how the definition is understood politically, and this difficulty that we have sometimes in terms of framing our issues under maternal health? I think back to the days of the MDGs, and really hooking our issues under maternal health, and this desire that we have on the other side of the spectrum of really trying to be progressive and comprehensive with a strong rights focus. Anyone have any thoughts? Emily?
Yeah, I can chime in. I just an anecdote that most of us are probably familiar with. I think there's a lot of folks here living in the US, and I feel like something that's really prominent here is politicians on the left, on the right, feeling like abortion is a dirty word, or abortion is something that hypothetically, yes, we believe in it, but we're not going to talk about it. And something that happened recently, of course, Biden is now president. He revoked the gag rule. We're seeing some progress made on all of the, terrible steps back under Trump. And yet when he came out with a statement on, moving forward SRHR, the word abortion was never used in his statement. And, a lot of advocates kind of saw that and thought, we know that you're going to move forward at least some progressive legislation on abortion, yet you don't want to say it because it's polarizing here and it's something that'll move people away. And it's like, saying family planning or saying, reproductive health or maternal health, it's more palatable, I think, for potentially a lot of Americans, or it's something that is seen as less divisive. When you put abortion specifically on the table, it gets murky. So I think that's something really interesting to think about in the US and of course around the world, is how can abortion specifically become, a really prominent focus if we're moving forward SRHR, when even folks, on the left are hesitant to use it. So I'll pause there.
Thanks. Yoke, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond from so I work in a European context, and we're facing like a slightly different challenge, so to say, in the sense that when we talk to our donors, a lot of our European governments have endorsed the Guttmacher Lancet definition. And so in the context of FP, for example, and in the context of, for example, now FP 2030, we're facing the opposite challenge, where actually they want us to talk about SRHR and the full definition, and we don't find a lot of connection with the FP angle only. So we have to talk about abortion and about the full SRHR agenda if we want to speak to them in the same terms almost. So it's so that's why I think this is an interesting conversation on seeing how we can bridge those two communities. Because in Europe, we've got a different, at least the Western Europe, and I'm talking about European donor countries, have come from a different perspective.
Thank you for that. We've definitely seen that in the UK. Felicia, I don't know if you wanted to comment on some of the experiences we've had in the UK using this definition, and how receptive the newly formed FCDO has been around the new definition.
Hi, I was gonna, I think it's interesting because they've, when we've had, Eric, I think I've said it before, but we sit on head up the UK SRHR network. It's like a civil society network of SRHR organizations. And it's, really when the report was launched, we did a session. It was really well attended. I think that most of the people, it was European, actually, I think it was a global event in London. And then, throughout the years, it's been really useful, I think, for us when we've been talking to FCDO and because DFID or FCDO was on the commission, is fully embraced. And I think what's really interesting is kind of embracing the definition is one thing, but then actually using it in more purposefully in policy discussions is where I think we have a little bit more work to do. And in a way, it's actually helping our kind of policy allies to be able to use it and translate that language to other kind of policymakers decision makers who aren't so keyed into what the definition is or what it means. So I think it's that second piece that I think has been, it provides an opportunity for us, I think, to be able to kind of draw those linkages. And then also, I also want to just comment a little bit just from the HIV side. For many years, I've been working on HIV and SRHR integration, and the definition really, I think, opened up the opportunity more for greater integration, but also because it is from this like rights-based principle, that meant it was like a no-brainer for us to talk about, for example, women who use drugs and accessing FP and other reproductive health services and having them be included in these services where they'd be typically left out. So, I think Eric and I are talking about doing another event just to say, where are we 3 years on? Because it's worth keeping, I think, the dialogue open. And there's so many opportunities now also with the new administration in the US to really, for us to be allies from Europe, to be like, hey, here's this really great thing. This will help, help the agenda for everybody. So it's a great opportunity. And so I think it'd be really interesting to hear from everyone also just kind of, because I've been working very much in kind of that integration space. And I think, what makes it difficult, maybe for folks who are working primarily from the family planning side, like what are some things that would help us come together, I think, just from that comprehensiveness piece, or are there pieces that, which puzzles are we kind of part of that we can bring together? I'd be really interested to hear what people thought about that as well.
Thanks, Felicia. And Vera, you had your hand up.
Yes, so I think a lot of folks in the FP community are excited about this definition and being able to expand the work and break down silos and collaborate more effectively. I think, and I think it's interesting, even the makeup of this group is that how does that get translated to our partners working in the global South? And so, one of the things that we've been talking about is particularly if you want to move forward with sexual rights, and, we think specifically about sexual minorities, how are we going to move into, other countries in talking about where, homosexuality is illegal, and to what extent does, especially with the simultaneous conversation about local ownership, are we going to have these cultural clashes of Western, donors and organizations saying, well, you have to integrate sexual minorities into your, that's the only, because I think, many of us hold that to be true. And it's going to create an interesting clash. But, learning from others who've been in the family planning field for a long time, their position has been that family planning was in a similar position, 20, 30 years ago, in which we're sort of like imposing this quote unquote Western ideal on other places, and there is a greater adoption, obviously. So I think it's going to be a delicate balance of, working with advocates on the ground, who already believe in this combined definition, and getting us to really work at the margins. I think so much of family planning is moving, sort of like in these very broad communities, that a lot of the rights-based work that needs to happen has to do with the most marginalized. And that's going to be a tough fight.
Thank you for that. I think so often about how family planning is often the gateway service or the entry point, at least when it comes to service delivery. I worked at IPPF for many, many years, and that's the way we always said it, that most clients arrived at services for family planning services, but were able to access, a package of comprehensive services. And I really see that as kind of what's included in this definition is really recognizing that integration that needs to happen. But I'm wondering if we should also talk about the neglected areas that are highlighted in the Commission report. So 4 neglected areas are identified. Those are safe abortion care, CSE, gender-based violence, and infertility. And I'd love to hear what you think we can do to really be able to strengthen those neglected areas, especially when it comes to family planning. Should we maybe start with one of them? That might be a really big question to chew off. So should we maybe start with adolescents and comprehensive sexuality education? And how could we really strengthen that particular area when it comes to family planning? Felicia, did you have any thoughts, particularly on any work that you've been doing to really focus in on any of those neglected areas at Frontline AIDS?
And I was just typing into the chat and I'll do it later also. Just kind of in response to Vera's kind of comments also just around, the sexual rights aspect of it. And we have many partners on the ground that are working on this in itself. And we'd be really happy to connect with the wider, I think, family planning community, because they, I think this, the definition also, and just like the report is aiming to bring the movements together, the different movements. So I'd be really happy to do that. In regards to CSE, actually, we've been working with a lot of young people in Uganda in particular, and around our READY project, which a part of it is around CSE, both informing kind of government curriculum, but also having that's also doing more comprehensive elements through peer education. I think that and this is our, and I can definitely see like a piece of this would be helpful is just around distilling the definition and elements of the definition even more into like what people can use for trainings and things like that. So yeah, I mean, and it's just also just, I think identifying these neglected areas has helped us kind of focus more on our programming on the ground. I don't think any of these areas are like new areas of neglect, but having it all being said in one place from Guttmacher Lancet has given it, weight with the evidence behind it. And so I think we just continually kind of draw back on that evidence as we're doing advocacy and as we go forward. Yeah.
So Yoke, I wanted to ask you a question related to IPPF's declaration on sexual rights. And at the time, that declaration was very bold and progressive. And I feel like I saw a lot of that language also being used in the Guttmacher Lancet Commission as well, that really strong emphasis on sexual rights. I just wonder if you could speak at all to how receptive European donors have been around that strong emphasis on sexual rights, and especially in communities and countries where laws might not permit the expression of sexual rights to its full capacity.
Yeah, well, as I was saying earlier, I think a lot of our European donors have by now endorsed the Guttmacher Lancet definition and are using it throughout their policy and their policy making, referring to it in statements that they make in global or international spaces, and so on. So they've really been quite receptive to it. In some countries, it is their new this part already of their development policy and their SRHR policies and strategies. So I would say, yeah, very receptive to the rights angle and to a more comprehensive definition. In terms of how that lands in their bilateral political dialogues with countries, I think they also adapt to the context that they engage with. When I see, for example, we follow a lot of the UN negotiations and so on, and they will obviously go for what is possible and within those contexts. So they'll push for it as much as they can, but they will be happy with adopted language if needed, and if there's not more that they can get. So I think they're also looking at how to build bridges and the countries that are a little bit less receptive. And I think in that perspective, I think it helps with what Felicia was saying earlier, with breaking it down. I think for having conversations and those dialogues between countries or people who have different views on it, it can help by really breaking it down, and then often you do end up landing in the same place, or realizing your views aren't necessarily as far as wide from each other, I guess.
Great, thank you. And with what you said, really made me reflect on our experience in the UK. You know, Felicia and I mentioned that in the UK, they have been such a strong supporter of really adopting the definition as being their approach to SRHR. Of course, at the bureaucratic level, let's see about the political level. I think that's another piece that remains to be seen. But one thing we've identified in the UK is in the recently merged new government department that really brings together the diplomatic component of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office with the development wing. And we've been talking quite a bit with our colleagues of how they can leverage some of that soft diplomatic power to put a little bit of pressure when we talk about things like abortion in Poland, abortion. I think that's what we were talking about with them, Felicia, and Argentina as well. So it's not all doom and gloom, even though we are facing really, really massive cuts in the UK. And I think we also see FP 2030 as kind of our next really big moment in the UK to really encourage perhaps making a bold commitment using some aspects of the definition.
I was going to say also the FCDO has been for years actually also trying to advance their LGBT rights policy and agenda across various embassies. And you know, I think this is one of those tools that they may not have actually drawn on, that I think it'd be useful for us to kind of remind them that it's there, just to connect, to just connect it all up again, the rights piece with the kind of the health piece again.
So I'm just conscious that we have about 8 minutes left. I know we joined late, but I do think we're going to have a hard finish in about 8 minutes. So I'd like to just move swiftly to our last question, really, and thinking through what opportunities or challenges do we see moving forward in using this expanded definition in the future. We talked a little bit in the UK, using it around the FP 2030 commitment, but we'd love to hear any other thoughts that you had.
So I can add something just from a language perspective. I think one of the challenges is that when we talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights, there is also a conservative movement all over the world. We're even seeing it in Europe, where SRHR is more, I guess, acceptable than in other countries. And it's important to make sure that from an advocacy perspective that we own this language and it's used constructively and I guess powerfully is the word. So this narrative is not undercut by the negative language used from people who have, or groups that have opposing views. I think, you'll always have this tussle, but I guess what I'm trying to say as a communicator is not let others take advantage of open spaces and redefine what sexual and reproductive health and rights actually means and take it away from women's empowerment. I mean, I see it as from the empowerment lens, not just for women, but minorities as well. And to be able to talk in that language to policymakers, because it's really when this advocacy turns policy into action is when you see people that we want to be able to benefit from this terminology in terms of their sexual and reproductive health and their rights to get to that point. And I've just, as a communicator and very interested in how words are formulated, I've been seeing how family planning and sexual rights are mentioned and translated in countries across the world. And I am troubled by the very conservative element that seems to take this language and put it in a very negative light. And it's very convincing sometimes to people who are in the middle. So that's, just coming from the advocacy space as well. I think as advocates, we have to be very clear what we mean, and there should be some unification in how we talk about these issues, especially when we talk to policymakers and ministries of health. So I'll just add that point in the conversation as well.
And such an important point. You can definitely see this being manipulated to give a completely different lens if we don't own it and speak from the same sheet. Does anyone else have any reflections? There's a few people we haven't heard from. So because I'm a stickler for time and I really want to make sure that we finish and we're not just sadly cut off, do you have any last reflections on any opportunities or challenges you foresee? Please do pop it into the chat. Feel free to say a few final words. But we are going to share a last slide. And we're going to ask you to use that annotate button again and tell us what you thought of our session. So again, on the view options, click down, click on the annotate, choose your stamp of choice, and give us an indication what you thought of our session. See a few people have their thumbs up, which is great. We'll take that. See a few things in the chat. Wonderful. Great. It's been so nice to talk to all of you and to hear your different perspectives. I only wish we could be together in person, or that we had more time to continue the discussion. Yes, I agree, Maya, in the chat. I know it was really hard that people came late. I am sorry.
Hopefully we can continue this in person at the ICFP whenever that happens, if COVID doesn't continue to take over our lives.
I agree. We will push hard. When the session started, I did mention that we pushed really hard to make sure that this session was included in the advocacy and accountability roundtables, because we thought it was such an important discussion. So we will definitely take that up and continue the fight to make sure it's included on the next one. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for your feedback, for your comments. And we really hope to see you using the definition to push forward on these issues. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet all of you.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.